Pirsig's metaphysics of quality. The metaphysics of quality is a theory of reality introduced in the novel Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, written by Robert Pirsig, a work of semi-autobiographical fiction which takes place during a cross-country motorcycle trip undertaken by a narrator, his son, and earlier in the story, a husband and wife who are friends with the narrator. Pirsig would later expand upon his work in his second book, Lila, An Inquiry into Morals, published in 1991. The metaphysics of quality contains parts of East Asian philosophy, including Hinduism and especially Buddhism. Pragmatism is another cornerstone of the theory. Pirsig was also influenced by and incorporates Native American philosophy. Pirsig argues that the metaphysics of quality is a better way to view reality instead of the traditional dualistic subject-object mindset. Pirsig was a gifted child with an IQ of 170 at age 9. He skipped several grades and eventually enrolled at Blake School, a school for gifted children. At the age of 15, he enrolled in the University of Minnesota to study biochemistry. In his first book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, he describes himself as being far from typical student. His interest lay in science as a goal in itself rather than a way to establish a career for himself. Whilst attending college as a chemistry student, he became disenchanted with science, after coming to believe that life's ultimate answers were not going to be found in science. This realization ground his interest in scientific work to a halt, and he was expelled for failing grades, immaturity, and inattention to his studies. Later, he received a degree in philosophy from the University of Minnesota in 1950. While studying philosophy at Banaras Hindu University in Varanasi, India, Pirsig came across the Sanskrit doctrine of Tat Tavam Asi, which Pirsig defined in his words as "Thou art that," which asserts everything you think you are, the subjective, and everything you perceive, or objective, are undivided. To fully realize this lack of division is to become enlightened. Pirsig would return to the U.S. to teach rhetoric at Montana State University. There, he was encouraged by a colleague to explore what exactly was meant by the term quality. He tasked his students with defining it. Pirsig first assigned them the task of defining the word good. Ultimately, no single definition would come of it, but his students did agree that they knew something was good when they saw it, but found it almost impossible to put a finger on exactly what that was. His experience with his students' attempts to define good and experiencing Native American church ceremonies led Pirsig to what he described as, quote, a mushroom cloud of thought, unquote. From there, Pirsig began developing his ideas about quality in his first book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. These ideas were later expanded upon and arranged into a system Pirsig named, quote, the metaphysics of quality, in his second book, Lila. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. In his book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Pirsig begins with exploring the meaning and concept of quality, and, like his students in Montana, he tasked with defining good, comes to the conclusion that whilst quality exists and can be recognized, it is also by its very nature undefinable. Whilst his book has obvious associations to the Zen goal of attaining a direct viewing of the universe, one that is free from preconditioned or imagined ideas as to what should be. However, Pirsig sometimes disagrees with Zen thinking and posits that Western school of rational thought is equally important. In a nutshell, Pirsig is attempting to argue that both schools of thought are necessary in order to experience quality, and one should apply them both as the situation requires. In the book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Pirsig uses his friends accompanying him on the journey to illustrate a purely romantic view of the world. The man knows nothing about, and refuses to learn, motorcycle maintenance, preferring instead to rely on professional mechanics should something go wrong, and simply hope nothing does. The man knows nothing about and refuses to learn motorcycle maintenance, preferring instead to rely on professional mechanics should something go wrong, and simply hope nothing does. When things do, all the man can do is be frustrated and search for someone who can fix the problem. The book's narrator, who is based on the real Pirsig, illustrates a classic approach to life. When something on his motorcycle fails, he can fix it himself. If it begins to run too rough or too hot, he employs his past experience and a rational approach to solve it before it breaks completely, leaving him stranded. These two different perspectives, the romantic focused on the now Zen viewpoint and the rational analytical Western view, are used by Pirsig to illustrate his argument that to best view the reality of the world, a balance of both is needed. The narrator understands both viewpoints, but argues that instead of aiming for a perfect middle ground between them, one should seek whatever the appropriate blend of the two is, depending on the given situation. This will result in an outcome of the highest quality. Pirsig's narrator argues that because the rational technological world looks ugly and dehumanizing to a romantic-minded person, conflict and thus unhappiness arise when they are confronted with something that can't be fit into their romantic view. However, if one has the ability to understand and appropriately employ the classical view and the romantic viewpoints simultaneously, then what once appeared to be a complicated pile of frustrating technology, such as a motorcycle, becomes beautiful in both its rational and romantic forms simultaneously. The goal of this sort of acceptance is to bring about an inner peace in the mind. It is dependent on the attitude of the beholder, or the lack of one. Pirsig traces his idea back to the early Greek philosophers who created the idea of truth and its opposition known as the good. Although the rational truth path can lead to the answer or outcome being sought, it is not always the best method for every situation. Pirsig argues that the Greeks split the two ideas artificially because they regarded truth to be the higher of the two forms. As Western culture grew out of these early Greek thinkers, truth retained its higher status, and today, this high emphasis on truth over quality is a source of much anger and frustration felt by many towards modern life. What Pirsig seeks is a view of the world that is less rigid. Instead, he seeks one that applies the romantic and or classical appropriately from situation to situation, ultimately seeking the result of the highest quality. Approaching a situation with this sort of view of the world leaves the door open to any solution from either school of thought, or more likely, a blend of both as long as it results in the outcome of the greatest quality. By not approaching a situation with a preconceived idea, the mind is free to think creatively towards the outcome, freely taking from either the romantic or classical views as necessary. Pirsig is saying that both a scientific rationale and a Zen-like living in the moment can coexist in the mind, and such a combination of the two removes the preconditioned views within the mind, thus allowing a person to view the reality of the world around them, bringing about a greater and more harmonious life. In his second novel, Lila, An Inquiry into Morals, Pirsig again combines a story with philosophical discussion. In this book, Pirsig aims to further develop the ideas on quality that arose from Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance into a fully defined metaphysical system. Lila, How Pirsig Defines Quality. According to Pirsig, quality, or value, cannot be traditionally defined because it precedes any intellectual constructions. He describes quality as the knife edge of experience, likening it with the Tao, stating that quality is the fundamental force in the universe which stimulates everything to evolve and incorporate increasing levels of quality. In Lila, Pirsig states, quote, "Evolution is quality in action." And according to the metaphysics of quality, everything, including the mind, ideas, and matter, is a product and result of quality. Pirsig breaks down quality into two main forms: static quality patterns, which is patterned, and which also has four sub-forms, which will be covered later, and the other is dynamic quality, which is unpatterned. According to Pirsig's work, the four patterns of static as well as dynamic quality account for all of reality. As dynamic quality becomes habituated, it turns into one of the four static patterns. It's important to note here that Pirsig is not proposing a duality. Under Pirsig's system, quality is one, yet manifests itself differently. The first stage is dynamic quality. Dynamic quality is, quite simply, everything which is not static. It is the force of change in the universe. When something of dynamic quality becomes habitual, it becomes static. Pirsig calls dynamic quality the pre-intellectual cutting edge of reality, because it can be recognized before one even has a chance to think about it. To put it another way, quality lies in the moment we sense anything. Another example of dynamic quality would be the first time you hear a piece of music and your initial feelings towards it before an analysis takes place as to why you like it or do not like it. Our mind quickly gives this impression a static form by describing it in terms of emotions, living and non-living things, ideas, etc. More on these later. If the static form of something has enough good or bad quality, is given a name and is exchanged with others, and then added to the knowledge base of a culture. Thus, some cultures create divisions between things where others see those as equal. For example, Pirsig cites the sounds of the Indian syllables da and da, which are absolutely equal to Western ears, but not Indian. The second stage is static quality patterns. Pirsig defines static quality as everything that can be conceptualized or recognized as forming patterns. Pirsig then divides static quality into 4 patterns of value. In ascending order of morality, they are 1. Inorganic patterns, or non-living things. 2. Biological patterns, living things. 3. Social patterns such as behaviors, habits, rituals, and institutions. 4. Intellectual patterns, or ideas. Pirsig states that evolution is the moral progression of these patterns of value. Under this definition, a biological pattern overcoming an inorganic pattern, for example bird flight, which overcomes gravity, is a moral thing because a biological pattern is a higher form of evolution. An intellectual pattern of value overcoming